This week on Security and Compliance Weekly, we thought since it's Cinco de Mayo, or as Scott refers to it, Revenge of the 5th, and it's a day where a lot of people are going to be imbibing anyway, we thought it'd be a good time to have a group discussion about my favorite topic, PCI.
Drink.
Yes, it comes up in the conversation just about every week on this show, and why wouldn't it? Because what else is there besides PCI? But today we're going to focus on the PCI topic in and of itself, and try to answer a couple of the burning questions, at least that I have about PCI, especially in terms of the perception within the security industry, but also within the compliance side of things, and maybe even the vendor side of the world as well. In our second segment, we're going to sort of keep talking PCI, but try to apply it to the news and see what's in the news over the past week or so, or decade, since Josh had to scrape the barrel to find a relevant PCI story that was disparaging of PCI. He had to go back 10 years. All this and more on this week's episode. So stay with us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk that hinges on integrated visibility, automated insights, and coordinated actions. RSA solutions are designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. RSA protects millions of users around the world and helps more than 90% of the Fortune 500 companies thrive and continuously adapt to transformational change. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security.
Welcome to episode number 27 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on Cinco de Mayo 2020. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my esteemed co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons, Mr. Josh Marpet, and our fearless CEO leader, Mr. Matt Alderman. Gentlemen, cheers.
Cheers, Cinco de Mayo.
Get your drinks ready.
Wouldn't it be COVID de Mayo, though? Or is that too soon?
Too soon. Hey, as advertised, we're going to focus our discussion today, have a group discussion on PCI. First, we do have a couple announcements. Drink. We really do need to have that counter, Johnny. That would be great. Anyway, we're excited. We're looking forward to going to InfoSec World 2020, which has been rescheduled for June 22nd through 24th. Fingers crossed that everything will be open. Oh, I'm sorry. Scratch that. It's now a fully virtual event. Security Weekly listeners can still save 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. You can get there by visiting securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the registration button to register with our discount code. A virtual InfoSec World. That's almost worth a drink in and of itself. Also, if you want to join the Security Weekly mailing list, you can visit securityweekly.com/subscribe and click the button to join the list. We will be starting to roll out our public Discord channel in the next week or so. I think I might have seen an announcement about that. And our mailing list subscribers will get the first invites. Alrighty. Everything is Discord. We should have a PCI channel in Discord, I think.
Drink. Yeah, what kind of stuff are we covering in the Discord channel?
So the Discord channel has a general area. There's already 215 people signed up, by the way. We were talking about it this morning. We just rolled it out officially yesterday, so it'll continue to roll over the next few weeks. But each show has its own channel. That way, people can actually engage with the hosts on the show. for the different shows if they're interested in specific topics. There's a general forum. There are drink recipes now available after the last webcast, and also you can interact in the webcast channel as well. So it provides the community the ability to engage with the hosts and other folks at various times during all the content we produce, whether it's a webcast or a show.
You know, it's really good because the Discord channel for Security Weekly is really meant to help engage. Because a lot of time the listeners or viewers will be sitting back in their chair saying, well, I don't believe, you said X correctly, or I want to know more about Y, and really get a discussion going in there. It's a really good initiative. If you have a chance, check it out. If you don't, well, can't help you there.
And if you don't, we will not argue with you. If you do,
says who? Says who?
There is a rule. There's one rule. Don't be an ass.
All right, I'm out.
Yeah, I guess I'll skip that one. Hey, Matt, is there or will there be a link from our website to have people find our Discord channel?
Well, you have to be invited to the Discord channel because it's an invite. There's different roles set up. So younglings.
Gotcha.
Jedi Masters, and then obviously the host level. So there's going to be different levels over time. Right now, it's an invite into younglings, which is the base kind of role that comes in. So that's what we're using to get people initially engaged, and then over time they will start to mature up into different roles. So
interesting.
I haven't figured out how to link it from the website yet, just because it's a general channel. So we wanted to get our existing subscribers first access to it before we start to open it up more. So over time, I think, we'll probably make it a little easier to get in to the base level.
Let me ask you a question. For those that are missing the point inside of a Discord conversation, can we have a Stormtrooper channel?
Oh, I don't know. Don't look at me. Ping Sam.
Everybody wants a little bit extra.
That's her project, baby. That's hers.
So it's Sam's
You got to miss something.
Just blame Sam.
Enough with the Discord. I want to talk PCI.
We need to get that trending on Twitter. Just blame Sam.
By the way, I'm keeping a counter.
Excellent. Hey,
so what are we talking about today,
Jeff? Take control, would you? This is your topic.
We are talking PCI, and we have a tradition here at Security and Compliance Weekly. Generally, when we're interviewing someone, to start off with sort of a question, just a level-setting question of where do you stand on the continuum of security versus compliance? Because Josh added some stories today that are designed to get my dander up in terms of PCI and why are we even talking about it. I thought I'd put him on the spot today and also just give our listeners a chance to know each one of us individually. But Josh, you're in the hot seat. What is your take and what is your view? Where do you stand on the security versus compliance continuum?
That's a great question. I will answer it thusly. While I absolutely agree with a lot of people that security does not equal compliance and compliance does not equal security, i.e. you can be compliant without being secure or secure without being compliant. To do a proper job as an information security professional, you must be conversant in both. It's that simple. These days, security and compliance are intertwined through business, which is the third point of that triangle. To do business properly, you must be both secure and compliant. They are symbiotic and work together through business. Does that answer it quickly?
Yep,
yeah,
that sounds good.
Josh, I want to pull on a couple threads for a second, right? Because I came out of the security side, went to the compliance side for a while, built out some GRC products and stuff. And when I think about compliance holistically, security is one subset in a overall compliance regime. And the reason I say that, and I'm curious on your thoughts, is there's legal compliance, there's financial components, there's contractual components, there's other things outside of security. So I've never equated the two because I don't think you can. Because compliance has a much broader set of requirements, security being one. How does that factor into your thought process when you say they're symbiotic? Do you account for the other things that are in compliance that may not be considered part of a security regime?
Well, yes and no, and I'm going to disagree with you slightly. I think it's fascinating what you put. What you put out there was that compliance is bigger than security because it deals with so many things that are outside the purview of security. I'm going to disagree with that. Security has to deal with the legal regime. I had it on my resume once that I speak geekies, legalese, and human, okay? Because they're all necessary to be part of a security a security role. If you're a serious security wonk, you probably speak legalese because you've read enough contracts with vendors, with customers, with suppliers, with whatever. Okay, you have to. It's part of your job. So and I'm picking on legal, but you get the idea. The point is that security is just as broad as compliance. But your point that they are different is very true as well. I think that compliance sees things differently than security does, and vice versa. And remember, in every company is different. Some companies don't care about, because they don't have to or don't need to or it doesn't matter to them, about various aspects of this. There are companies that have no compliance standards that they must apply to or work with. There are companies that barely have security that's necessary for them. Basic cyber hygiene at best. So and then there are companies that are absolutely monstrously tied to large compliance regimes and security standards and everything under the sun. Sorry, I'm not trying to take away from your question. It's a damn good question. It is such a wide and varied landscape that it is tough to generalize.
Well, I wonder if part of Matt's point of view might come from, some of the earlier or really contemporary compliance standards that were put out there, early to mid 2000s. I don't know the exact date, but I'm thinking Sarbanes-Oxley, where it was touted within.
I mean, if you think about the early regulations, right? You have Gramm-Leach-Bliley that really was changing the way banking could do different things like insurance and other stuff because they were restricted.
But for each of those, security was just a subcomponent, subsection, subparagraph, whatever, in a much larger thing. Yes. So I think that's part of where you're coming from in terms of security is just one part, whereas other compliance standards or frameworks like PCI, it's all about security.
Exactly. And that's why I asked the question, because when I look at the early regulations, HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, Sarbanes-Oxley, security was a small subset of that component. Right. Then you move to PCI where it's all about security, right? And some people equate the two more equally because they think of PCI. And I think of some of the early regulations where security was just a subset in a broader set of regulatory requirements that included credit risk and legal and all kinds of other components.
Something I was thinking about today, and I want to ask all you guys for your input or your opinion on this. Just trying to, type in our topic for today in the wiki. We talk about compliance standards. We talk about frameworks. We talk about regulatory or whatever PCI is, because it's not government driven, but just terminology wise, we talk about standards, frameworks, regulatory guidelines, if you will. Right. In your mind, do they all mean the same thing, or are there subtle differences? Is it important to distinguish, for example, between a compliance standard and a compliance framework? And how does that
I'm going to throw my hat in the ring there for a
about?
Second.
Sure.
I used to call them compliance regimes, and then people were like, no, it's a standard. I'm like, oh, okay, they're kind of co-equal, right. and they are, except that your point about it's a framework versus it's a standard versus it's a whatever. To a certain extent, in common vernacular usage, if you will, they're kind of co-equal. Okay. I'm going to put my company against this compliance standard. I'm going to assess against this framework, whatever.
Right.
But in if you want to be pedantic, and we are nothing if not pedantic here, damn it.
We kind of live on being pedantic. That's why people tune us in.
A tad. They are not the same thing. A standard is something you measure against. A framework is something you live within. And I think that's my best sort of off-the-cuff definition. Anybody else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. A standard is something we measure to. So you think about the PCI data security standard. It is a set of requirements that I need to measure myself against. A framework gives you guidance or a starting point. It doesn't necessarily dictate, it kind of guides. And that's where I see the difference between a standard that I have to measure myself against and a framework which guides some of my direction, but it gives me a little more flexibility and freedom.
Love
is it as simple as the difference in terms of the language of the two, between statements saying you must do this and statements where you say you should do this?
No, actually, I'm gonna switch what you're saying. There are two kinds of standards or frameworks out there, in my opinion. There's descriptive and prescriptive. A prescriptive standard, I'm going to use 853 from NIST. You must do exactly this, and this is how you do it, and this is why you do it, and this is what you do. Okay? It is very prescriptive. There's descriptive standards, which I'm going to point at NIST 800-171, which is the follow-up to that, which is, hey, you need to protect against these dangers. You need to do things that will help you here. It doesn't tell you exactly how. It tells you why you're doing things, and then expects you to come up with the time, technology, process appropriate answers for those questions.
Sort of a variation on this question. And actually, before I ask my next question, Scott, you've been kind of silent. Do you have any opinion on what we've been asking or saying so far?
I do, but I wanted to be sure to give you guys time to be able to get your thoughts out, right? Not saying that my thought is better, but it's the totality of the sum as a whole. Yes, we'll go with that. Security and compliance. To have both pieces, you need to have maturity in your protection program, right? You can't have one without the other. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and depending on which compliance regime you have, it dictates how strict your security needs to be, right? Along with what your vertical is, right? So if you're a mom and pop pizza shop, right, you can have compliance, you can have security, but it doesn't really need to be that strict versus, $ healthcare organization or $ government entity, right? So it goes towards the maturity of your organization. It goes towards, do people in your organization buy into the programs? Can people get behind it? Why is it most important? And oh dear God, is that so true? And pulling it all together, right? Can you survive a systemic shift with both compliance and security together? When you're talking about compliance, it's driven on three things, right? Policies, procedures, and control implementation. If you're a fan of the show and you've seen it before, you've heard us talk about this, right? But to be able to have both of those put together, you have to have the right culture, the right backing by stakeholders. It's the environment that you've installed the security and compliance maturity into that is really going to affect what the business does. Make sense?
Yes. I'll give you a perfect example. Can I? Can I?
Sure.
So yesterday I interviewed Graham Payne on Business Security Weekly. And anybody who knows Graham Payne, he was the human heir associated with the Equifax breach. So we had him on yesterday to get some lessons learned from, probably one of the most famous data breaches in the U.S. And to your point, Scott, I asked him three questions, right? I said, a cyber resilient company, based on some of the guidance we've gotten from some other folks, say, look, you got to have a good governance structure, culture of security, and you spend the appropriate money. And two of the three of those they had nailed, but they still got breached, right? And so again, you can have a great level of maturity, to your point. You have to create this culture within your environment, but you also have to spend the appropriate amount of money to secure your environment. And where I think a lot of the fall down is doing some of the basics, spending and prioritizing funding on the right areas. But there's a highly regulated company that had two of the three pieces in place and still got breached.
So to expound on what you're saying, right? My personal belief is that there is a Pareto curve that can be dictated to figure out how much you need to spend versus what your vertical is versus your level of security versus what your product is, right? There has to be a way to be able to plot this on a Pareto chart, to be able to say, if you want to be this much secure, you need to spend this much amount of money inside of this vertical to achieve, like to a lot, it's a moving target, right? Number one. Number two, any program that is strong in its maturity has the people that are working for the business understand that they are a part of a bigger picture, right? That's why there are programs and companies that are dedicated towards insider threat, right? Most breaches happen inside of the company. I think we can all agree on that. I think the percentage is like 60 to 70% of breaches happen from people within the company, whether they're clicking on an email, they got hit by a phishing campaign, or they picked up a naughty USB out in the out in the parking lot. That's where the breaches happen. So trying to get everybody as buy-in to the why of security and compliance is the real Tao of doing the job. Would you guys agree, disagree? What do you think?
I from a semantic perspective, I disagree with people clicking on links, bringing something in as being an internal attack. But we can save that discussion for another day, because I think that's beyond. we could go down one too many rabbit holes here today.
Is that beyond with compliance? We can go down rabbit holes.
Oh man,
depends on the size of the hole. I mean, there is a standard for that.
Is it defined in PCI?
Actually, it is. No, it's requirement 13.4. To sort of round out the discussion on this initial question, and sort of as a tease to our audience and also to you guys, I'm actually doing a planning call this afternoon with a woman that we became acquainted with some months ago because we saw an article that had something to do with coming up with a resilient governance plan for boards of directors. And we saw an article, and I found the person who was named in the article, a woman named Ann Cleveland, and she works for the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. The article we saw was basically touting a report that they'd put together, and it's a combination between Booz Allen and the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. And I was reading through the article this morning, and it's resonating with what you guys, basically all of us, are talking about. What they're suggesting from a board perspective is to not have all these sort of absolutes, sort of like what we were, Josh was describing in terms of compliance, but they actually use a term, they refer to sort of these different categories of what a board should consider as dynamic tensions. And they're presenting in this article ways to just sort of measure where you are, sort of on the continuum, like we ask about this whole security and compliance continuum, which isn't one of their categories. But I thought there's a parallel, and I look forward to my conversation this afternoon. And I'm not sure exactly what the date, but it's somewhere in the near future. We're going to have her on to talk about this. So let's hold our thoughts on that, sort of striking the balance as we've been talking about. The next question I wanted to put forth to you guys, just because I'm curious about it, is, again, I struggle with, when I'm trying to describe this thing, regulatory compliance. Regulatory, in my mind, means the government is making you do it. And then there's other things. I'm very familiar with PCI not being driven by the government. And drink, of course, it's driven by the card brand saying, if you want to do business with our cards, you're gonna be follow this set of security standards. Are there other major compliance regimes that are considered not government driven, not regulatory, but whatever, similar to what PCI is? I'm not aware of any. I can't think of any.
Drink.
And I'm putting that to you guys. Are there any other out there besides PCI?
So there are standards that are government driven.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you. So there are standards that are government driven, as you so aptly pointed out. They range from American, FISMA, FedRAMP. There's oh dear God, there's European, there's PSD2,
Right.
there's actually PSD2.
There's myriad, but are there ones that aren't government driven?
Well, I don't think PSD2 in Europe is government driven. I think I think it is actually. I'm lying. So there's government-driven standards and there's industry-driven standards. Now, your point about PCI being an industry-driven standard makes total sense. Are there others? Off the top of my head, I'm going to say not very many. Most everything is government-driven because they're the only ones that can hand down the fines. That's basically why. Let's be blunt. The only reason that people follow standards is because of sanctions, fines, and so on and so forth. All the payment processors banded together for PCI, right? So, or most of them, the important ones, shall we say? So, PCI is the law of the land as per that, because they all got together and said, no, you don't do this. We're not dealing with you. You don't get to take credit cards. Have a nice day.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, because they wanted to self-regulate in their particular case, right? Which is why when you look at PCI, it is very unique compared to what you would normally see from a government agency, is they really understood the problem and came up with a guidance, a set of requirements to better manage their data. If you compare PCI to a normal congressional regulatory law, regulation like Gramm-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA, or whatever, they're night and day. There is no prescription in Gramm-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA, or Sarbanes-Oxley. There's none. It's like paragraphs, like really broad, open statements, where PCI is very specific. FISMA and what NIST did and some of the other things, they're more comparable to what's in PCI from a prescriptive standpoint, right? And those are the closest, federal regulations that look like PCI. But your normal laws, even Dodd-Frank, I mean, they're so vague. You have to interpret versus PCI, which is very prescriptive. But I don't know of another industry standard like PCI.
So it's not just me.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm sorry, Scott. It's not just me. PCI is different and unique compared to all the other things.
Yes.
So, and we're defining how it's different. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
No, what I was going to say was the government regulation is really a correction to the marketplace, right? The government is seeing some outlier anomaly affecting a marketplace, like credit card breaches, right, for PCI, right, or the misuse of funds by C-level execs for SOX, right, or information security breach mitigation, right, for SOC, right, SOC 1, SOC 2, right. Now, even though SOC 1 is financial, SOC 2 is data driven, it's still putting them together, right. So whenever you're looking at a regulation, right, whether it's SOC 1, SOC 2, SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, PCI, HIPAA, any of that, it's the government's attempt at doing a valid market correction. Right? Okay. Would you agree? Would you fight me on that?
I would not disagree, and I would not fight you on just about anything.
It's interesting. It all goes back to what we were talking about in the security versus compliance realm, right? It's all of the minutia pieces, plus its maturity of the program, plus the government regulation that's driving the market space to be in that new secure arena, to be able to protect information, protect PHI, protect user data, personal data, right? As we move into the next data-centric continuum, right now I'm throwing out really big words, people's privacy, like with stuff like GDPR and CCPA, is really going to come under fire from all of these states that are releasing regulations to try to correct the marketplace of businesses that happen to reside in those states, right? So that's the way that I see it.
Okay, so here's my burning question for you guys, and I think we're framing it very well. So we're describing the differences between, frankly, PCI and other standards or frameworks. And we're saying it's different, and we've described it as being one of the significant ways that it's different is that it's prescriptive rather than sort of vague, framework oriented type of language, which is interesting because PCI in and of itself is not terribly prescriptive. It's prescriptive in a few specific areas, but it points to the vagary frameworks and say pick one and follow it. So it's sort of both. But here's the question, and this is something I've been struggling with ever since I started working at Tenable 7 years ago. Why do vendors and the security community at large, and I'm necessarily being a little bit generic here. Right. Why do people not pay more attention to PCI, understand PCI, try to orient their marketing, sales efforts, tailoring their product solutions, whatever they're offering to addressing, within PCI, a specific requirement or a specific set of requirements or areas of focus? Why is everybody on the vendor side of things so averse to knowing and understanding PCI? Why do they congregate and migrate over to frameworks and regulatory and vagaries rather than specific language? Any thoughts? Any ideas?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. Mm-hmm. Number one, it's hard enough for a security vendor to really understand how to differentiate themselves in the general market, let alone in the compliance world. A lot of vendors throw around compliance as a way to get people interested to buy their product, but really don't understand how it works at the end of the day. Because they think, hey, if I can solve a compliance problem for you, you'll buy my product. I think vendors struggle in general to really differentiate themselves. And so when you think about compliance and all the different compliance regimes and how they meet it, that's just another level of granularity that they have to really map out to make it apparent on what they do. And they can't even do it for their overall company, let alone for a specific requirement like PCI.
Right. Does anybody else lacking and is bothered by that?
I hear what you're saying, but you've got to remember the old adage of, choose one thing and do it well, right? If we had vendors that gave holistic solutions, we'd be better off, but we don't, because people aren't paying for the whole holistic solution. They want to be able to fix, vulnerability scanning, or they want to be able to fix asset management tracking, or they want to be able to fix, some arcane implementation that they've concocted that fits their business, right? So being able to sit back and say, well, if vendors got in line, it's kind of difficult, right?
Yeah, well, but there you're describing the vendor floor at Black Hat or RSA, and I never thought I'd miss walking those floors, but I look forward to the day when I can do that again. But I mean, for the hundreds of companies that are out there, the vast majority of them are offering a point solution, and what always has bothered me the last couple of years as I've walked the floor is when a vendor has a point solution that I know satisfies a specific PCI requirement, and if I ask them about it, they're like, oh yeah, we do compliance. It's in there somewhere, because PCI is lumped together with all the other compliance things because they don't understand, they don't differentiate it. And yet we've spent the first segment here, describing in detail how PCI is different and is differentiated from those other compliance standards and regimes.
Can I give you one more reason why I think the vendors don't know or don't focus on it? I think PCI got a really, I wouldn't say bad rap, but there were a few vendors in the early days of PCI that undercut, from a pricing perspective, PCI. And I think a lot of the bigger vendors realized that it wasn't worth going after some of that business, because there were some very cutthroat vendors early on in the space that was, it was ridiculous how much they were charging to do PCI assessments, PCI compliance, et cetera. And I think that tainted part of the market, Jeff, where other vendors are like, look, I can't make money in PCI, so I'm going to talk about compliance, and PCI is going to be part of it, but I'm going to focus on something else because I don't think I can make enough money in PCI.
So it's interesting because I don't disagree with you. I think I see that. I just find it fascinating that all those vendors out there that don't point to something specific, like here's a differentiator, like we meet a specific requirement, whether it's PCI or anything else, why they gravitate more to the vagary of, we can do all sorts of wonderful things and sprinkle a little wiffle dust and compliance and shuffle the coconuts and think that they're going to sell anything. I almost feel like we should have a separate offering as a show, or a program of some sort that trains vendors on how to sell their product to the security community based on, here's half dozen reasons that you can point to that companies struggle with, compliance or PCI being one or two of them, and here's a reason why you should be buying our product and go from there. I
Jeff,
feel like
it's most vendors for a lot of our interviews on these shows are for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're kind of doing it, aren't we? Nudge, nudge, wink.
Simon Sinek, right? Great guy. If you've never heard any of his talks, go out to YouTube and take a look. Like you will learn, oh my God, so much. Simon has out a great TED talk that he did. It's about 5 minutes. Sinek. Yes. Sorry, I've been drinking. What do you want? Simon.
PCI.
Oh shit! Hang on, I gotta get the damn counter back up. All right.
God, I'm gonna have to refresh in between sessions. Simon did a great TED talk on the how, the why, and the what. Right, and it's not titled that, but you can easily Google it.
It's called the Golden Circle, and it's the why, the how, the what.
Yes, that's it exactly. And
that's how he saw it in his mind.
What, as a golden circle?
Yep.
The way you said it is the way most security vendors interpret it, which is the what, the how, the why, and they do it backwards, which is why they fail at marketing.
And that's what I was about to dive into and say that Simon was saying that the why is the most important, and most security vendors can't get the why across. You're walking through RSA. You walk up to a vendor, tell me why your product matters to me, right? Give me your vision, right? We were walking through the startup expo or area at RSA, and I was walking up to the vendors that I saw their marketing FUD, and I was like, listen, tell me why I care, get that point across. And most people that were manning the booths, they couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. You want to catch my attention, you've got to tell me why it matters to me. Why do I care? Yep. Josh and I have conversations all the time in the background for Red Lion. Why do we care? So what? Who cares? Right? How do we get this across? Right? And we make really great strides with being able to answer the why. If most vendors were able to come out with the why, it would be a lot better, right? Their sales would go up.
So Scott, Josh, Jeff, I don't know if you know this, but there is a blog post on Security Weekly's website that talks specifically about this. And I published it right before RSA conference to prepare both buyers and sellers on the things they needed to be able to understand and articulate. And I use Simon because, he's been famous for the Golden Circle for a long time. And I've incorporated it into a lot of the work that we do here at Security Weekly and for a lot of my advisory clients. If you read that post, it's maybe 350, 400 words, but it lays exactly out what you just talked about, Scott. And I actually give examples of how you start to do this.
Right.
We will make sure the link to that post is added to our wiki. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Hey, we need to take a break. We'll come back and we'll continue the discussion under the loose umbrella of news. PCI actually makes the news. Surprise, surprise. Drink. So let's go refresh our glasses and we'll be right back.